It is my pleasure to introduce a man that I've known as a friend and a colleague in business, a beer drinking buddy, for a very long time. And he has been busy in the last while working on another round of the Colorado Climate Action Plan. And we're all really excited about that in Colorado. So I think you know John Hickenlooper well enough to know that he doesn't need a long introduction. But it's my pleasure to introduce the governor of the state of Colorado, John Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for all the work you do. She and I helped organize the merging of the two large craft brewing associations, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, almost now. Mischief. Have Governor Ritter here. He has spent his time since being governor with one of the most focused and I think impactful efforts around climate change and organizing Western governors and all governors really in terms of what they can do and how they can help local communities organize as well. And just as I see what he's done, people always ask me what I'm going to do after I'm finished governor. Just watching the end of that presentation, I think I'm going to apply for a job at New Belgium. That's what. Also see Gina McCarthy is here, and if you actually look at people who do things that are impactful, I just jotted this down, was staying there. She drove home the Federal Climate Action Plan, the Clean Power Plan, the Paris Climate Agreement. So grateful for all of your work. What a remarkable leader. And she is also someone who commonly, when people tell her she can't do something, you can see her eyes sparkle a little bit. And you know, when we had the Gold King problem out here, and I remember her lawyer saying, well, you can't accept responsibility. Who knows what the legal consequences could be. There was just that, she didn't smile, but it was darn close. One of the first times I think ever the federal government stepped right up and said, we made a mistake, we're going to fix it. Really remarkable. I also want to thank Bloomberg Philanthropies for really taking the lead. One of the things you can't help but coming away with from Kim's remarks is that at the national level, when the federal government is not acting, it's not just states and local government that take the lead, it's businesses as well. And I know that we've worked real hard on that at many levels in Colorado, getting businesses to help be parts of this response. Now, Colorado's doing great. I'm sure you're all aware of that. We're one of the top 2 states for startups, one of the top states for job creation. We had unemployment last summer for 3 months of 2.3%. That's as low as anybody's had it in history. I think we're still among the 3 lowest rates of unemployment in the country. We finally seeing wage growth across the economy. U.S. News and World Report just came out yesterday for the 2nd year in a row, called us the #1 economy in the country. And yet, you can't help but have that success and feel a little bit threatened when you see things not being addressed. You know, a big part of the success of our economy is a word I've become, it sounds like an SAT word, so I've been told to use it less. But like Gina McCarthy, when people tell me no, sometimes I say yes. But topophilia means love of place. And I think love of place is at the heart of almost all successful, lasting economic development. And I think it's also at the heart of almost all successful social change and environmental work. It's what drives us to invest in training and opportunity, but it also drives us to protect our air and our water in Colorado, but I think in most parts of the country, it's part of our identification, of how we think of ourselves and how others think of us. And it's not just brand, and brand's important. In Colorado, you know, one big risk factor for us is our snowpack and our water, because it's not just the snowpack. If you look at how water is stored in Colorado, about half of it is in traditional reservoirs, The other half is in the snowpack itself, and it gets released over the course of the summer. That water is used for irrigation that allows us to be completely sustainable and independent. Another part of that sense of topophilia and love of places, it really does drive us to be good stewards of what we love, to make sure that what we are so impassioned about is preserved and protected for the next generations. In Colorado, it also drove us to take action on things that weren't being addressed in other places. We were the first state to create methane regulations, where we were able to bring the oil and gas industry and the environmental community. When we first started saying we were going to do this, people said, you can't do that. It's impossible. They hate each other. But in the end, and there were a few times when people walked out of meetings and we had to, that's part of the governor's role, was to be not the alpha dog, but the beta, maybe the zeta dog, but to go back in and grovel and say, no, come on back and let's keep working on this. Because in the end, we had a set of rules that both the environmental community and the oil and gas industry both took credit for, both said was a success. And in the process, we reduced volatile organic compounds by 90,000 tons a year. It's the equivalent of taking 300,000 cars off the road. This last year, we announced the electric vehicle corridor, where we got 8 Western states to come together. And just as a framework, these are 8 states coming together to build a set of rapid recharging stations along our interstates and important state highways. That's going to cover over 7,000 miles in 8 states. 6 of the states are Republican. Only 2 were Democrat. As we've reactivated the Colorado Climate Plan and really pushed activity down into cities and towns, we had a great conference about a month ago, and it was great. Colorado also, people don't know this, those of you from out of town, but there are more live music venues now in Denver than there are in Austin or Nashville. And we have all these, yeah, exactly, all these rock and roll bands. And Isaac Slade of the Fray came out to sing to our local towns and counties at our climate plan meeting, which was really, again, validating in a powerful way and created a buzz where I think when we do it again next year, we'll have twice the number of people. We were proud to come out and support America's Pledge. Appreciate all that the Bloomberg Philanthropies has done on this, and Governor Brown's leadership. At this point now, there are 20 states and 110 cities, 1,400 businesses, and I feel the momentum is just beginning. We're one of the first states that has kind of taken this on the larger scale. So our methane regulations was great. What else at scale can be done? And obviously, large-scale utilities are a big thing, and we're working with our co-ops, but also several of our big utilities, and it looks like we will have, or at least we're looking at, to see whether they can close a couple of coal plants, and in the process, not just have dramatically cleaner air, but also have people's monthly electric bills go down. So even as that possibility became possible, right, it's worth whooping about, right? Because it has always been the dream to have the reliability and the functionality and the energy we've always valued at that same cost or lower, but to finally have it clean. And we're on the edge of that, and yet still we had critics. You can imagine, you know who the people that are very resistant to this kind of change, they were attacking, and it allowed me that really joyful moment to say, now which part bothers you the most? Is it the lower cost for everyone, or is it the cleaner air? Because I'm not sure which one you're most upset with. The first set of bids that came in on one of these projects, the bids really were dramatically below the fossil fuel bids. And I think within the climate plan, the Colorado climate plan, but I think most plans were really focusing on trying to help communities transition. We're looking at the effect on things like watersheds, and we finished 2 years ago the Colorado Water Plan, which has really gone a long way in helping us map out a future around water and look at what the risks are and identify them from climate change. Reducing wildfires, saving money, all of that. Part of what we also came up with is looking at different constituencies that perhaps haven't been successfully organized. At the end of January, we had the first time the outdoor retailer show which is the largest convention we've ever had, and we're a pretty big convention town. But they came for 4 days, and this is a convention and trade show. And for the day before, we had the 8 states that have offices of outdoor recreation. They came and brought 7 to 10 executives or civic leaders, but people involved with the outdoor recreation industry, not with government. And they spent the whole day mapping out how to create a political action arm that will be nonpartisan and completely focused around clean air and clean water and public lands. And that, to me, is so exciting. They agreed they're going to go off and spend the next 6 months framing that clean air, clean water, public lands value system around 4 core concepts. One will be around economic development. One will be around stewardship and conservation. One will be around education and training. And one will be around public health and wellness. And there are 2 states with each of those 4, and they're working on it. They're going to come back to, we're going to call it the Colorado Accords, because it happened here. And governors are by nature competitive. But I think it allows us to imagine where all these businesses, which are scattered all over the country, are all going to be looking at school board races and state legislature races and saying, who's speaking up for clean air, clean water, and public lands? And Taryn Fennessy is here. She did a lot of work on this. Luis Benitez, if you haven't had a chance to meet Luis Benitez, you're in for a great joy. I think these new alliances, if they take root and really take hold, are very exciting. Just on a whole different thing, the National Rifle Association has 5 million, somewhere to 5 or 6 million members. REI, Recreation Equipment Incorporated, a co-op, has 16 million members. And they are passionate about clean air, clean water. They've never really been organized and directed. And the same is true with all the people that are so dedicated to Patagonia or Trek bicycles or North Face. You can go down the list. So I think that's a great potential opportunity. Right parallel with that is we also have to ask, why is it that we've had so much trouble with so many people resisting even acknowledging climate change? And I've got a master's in geology. I think I'm not sure this is a good thing. I think I'm the only geologist ever elected, a professional geologist ever elected a governor in the United States. Probably not a good thing. But the science is pretty clear, right? And again, science isn't perfect. One is always cautious never to say 100%, but it's pretty clear, and yet still there's this resistance. And I would argue it's because, just as we've seen in the last several elections, a large number of people, especially in smaller towns, smaller communities, and rural areas, feel that they have been left behind economically. Many people haven't had a raise in real dollars in 20 years. And they look at these changes as they believe they're probably going to hurt them or disadvantage them financially. And the last 6 or 7 years we've worked in Colorado, we have a thing called Rural Jumpstart. If you're an entrepreneur, you start a business in the rural part of the state, you don't pay any taxes to the state for 5 years. We have now a Rural Colorado Venture Fund to go out and try and incorporate, find and fund startups in rural parts of the state. We're really trying to push our economic success into the rest of the state, partly because it's going to allow us to be more unified in how we respond to all kinds of issues. Not just climate change, but I think gun safety, other issues are tied into this fact that so many people left behind. Buried in the tax bill that was passed by Congress a month ago is a thing called, this concept called opportunity zones. And they're going to allow, I'm not going to go into the details, but they're going to allow us, governors, to identify a number of lower income and low income census tracts that will qualify for remarkable, the most generous tax incentives on the federal level I've ever seen in my life, without a limit. It's not like saying you only get to do this much and then you stop. And I think, depending on how governors operate, the ability to push these tax credits into the smaller towns and the smaller communities, if it's done properly, will have a huge impact on letting people feel like they're not being left behind, and that there are there's economic activity and real opportunity coming for them as well. This is one of those moments where, and I think we're going to try and publicize it as hard as we can, make sure that it's distributed fairly, both geographically and economically across not just Colorado, but all states. But it's a place where local officials are going to be able to play a large role because so many of these companies are going to be small companies. And they've got to stay in the community to get the tax credits for 10 years. If they stay 5 years, they get some modest benefit. But the real benefit, I mean, basically, if you invest in one of these companies and that company stays in this census tract for 10 years, you will never pay any capital gains tax. I mean, if this doesn't entice people and entice entrepreneurs to go into new places all over the country, I don't think anything ever will. And at the same time this is happening, we're going to turn up the dial on our own, just Colorado's economic incentives. And I think that's part of what we've missed is we have not addressed the economic imbalance and the perceived unfairness in our system and how that's affected people's acceptance of science and people's willingness to adopt and change the way they think about energy and clean air and clean water. So you guys, even though I know many of you don't live here, you're still at this point deputized to go back and make that part of your planning around climate change and energy use is really also have to be about making sure we're all involved in distributing economic opportunity to all of our communities. Thank you. Now, I think I left it, I think I stayed pretty much almost on time, right? Connor is my wrangler. They used to call people like Connor your body person, but I've always thought that was inappropriate, so. He's my wrangler, but he times every single time I speak. So as with many people, sometimes I can get a little carried away. But anyway, I think I have 15 minutes for questions. And I'll use the, yes, way in the back. I'll use the Kim Jordan eye shade. Oh, I do have sunglasses. That would be kind of fun.
Thanks, Governor. My name is Gloria from Dow Chemical. Nice look of yours, definitely. As part of your Climate Change Act of Colorado, have you considered any price mechanism for emissions, like cap and trade or carbon tax?
We have looked at that, and we are continuing to look at it. And when I was in Washington last week, we're participating in several discussions with Ontario, even Canadian provinces, as well as the states along the West Coast. A couple discussions with Mountain West states. It is the Mountain West states work together very well, and I think we're not there yet, but they would be the natural partners that would make something like this really work. And there are a lot of issues around how that would be perceived in some of the states where they do have a lot of coal production and obviously a lot of economic dislocation. But by most people's opinions, having some sort of an economic market like that is the most efficient way to drive towards cleaner energy and eliminate climate gases. Yeah.
Hi, Governor. Patrick Pfeiffer. I work for the Norwegian State's Renewable Energy Company. Governor Brown in California signed a recent MOU with Norway, and it seems that governors now today are empowered to take unilateral action between not only state to state, but states to other jurisdictions and other governments. Does Colorado have any aspirations to sign their own MOUs between different countries in Colorado? And how does that play out in terms of the overall directive that you give to Colorado?
Well, I am certainly aware of the magnitude of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I did bring a pen. So we don't have any plans, but I think obviously the world is changing, and it's not just the United States. I think we're seeing a devolution of federal governments and what people feel comfortable in terms of giving them in terms of authority. And that is going to push more local agreements between states and other countries, or states and other countries. We obviously have certain federal restraints on things that we can't do, but we'd be happy to talk. And certainly the more that we can learn from other states about how to move our energy economy in ways that are not just cleaner and not just saving money, but are actually, economically gonna grow. When I was talking about opportunity zones, if you think about it, not just outdoor recreation, which is a natural for people that like to set up these small businesses. Generally, they don't want to live in cities, so they would go start in rural areas. But same with clean tech, right? And renewable energy. These would be, I think, they will qualify in every way. So a place like Norway, where you have all kinds of experience on water, hydraulic energy generation and renewable energies, the more we can trade ideas and systems, the better. Right here? There are mics everywhere.
Thanks very much, Governor. My name is Michael Rohr. I work for an organization called BSR. And my question for you is, how is Colorado thinking about building out the electrification for the transport sector? We've seen heavy trucks on the highways that could be electrified as well as vehicles. And the opportunity for policy to really accelerate that growth is tremendous. What's Colorado doing on this?
So, and that's a great question. These are all great questions. Obviously, states don't control that, but we can have an influence. So here in Colorado, we have a thing within what we call CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation. We have a thing called Road X. And we've been working on it for, I think Shailen Bhatt brought the concept, but Don Hunt before him was working on it probably six years ago. But we started in earnest 4 years ago, trying to look at all the ways that technology can make our highways safer and make them more efficient so that we don't use so much fuel. And part of that is things like electric vehicles at all different scales. Now, we're not going to be the ones that build the tractor trailer that shows how well it's going to work. But we can find ways that as that vehicle, as we begin, there's going to be a confluence, almost certainly, that electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, they're not going to quite be in lockstep, but they're pretty much in harmony with the timelines that most people look at. So those state departments of transportation have to be moving very rapidly right now to anticipate what are the challenges. One of the stories that always struck me when I first heard it, and it always comes back in my mind, was the whole notion of elevators, right? When they invented elevators because they got steel and they could build tall buildings and people didn't want to run up 30 flights of stairs, so they created elevators. And the early elevators were death traps, right? They wouldn't stop, you'd get in it, and as you were getting in, it would start going up. All kinds of accidents, loss of life. People were terrified, and that's why there was an emergency stop button in each one. Even when they got them, they put an elevator operator, had to be at every single elevator. People were so terrified. Even after about 1898, 1899, they had an autonomous elevator. In other words, the elevator would stop exactly at each floor, and the doors would open automatically and wait till people got out and then close automatically. And yet people still would not get in an elevator without an elevator operator until 1949, 50 years later, when there was an elevator operator strike in New York. And everyone just went crazy because the whole economy was grinding to a stop. But we have to be careful that that doesn't happen with autonomous vehicles, or else the whole thing will slow down. And the same thing with electric vehicles. I think they're going to be part and parcel of that transformation. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Janet Peace with C2ES, one of the hosts for this conference.
Thank you I should have thanked the sponsors. Thanked all the sponsors. These things don't happen by themselves, so I apologize.
They don't. A lot of people help with this. So Colorado has a lot of agriculture. I happen to be from Colorado. You guys doing anything with the emissions from the ag sector?
So we're looking at it, and we have, there's a guy named Jay Menon, who was the head of the business school at Colorado State University for about 10 years, and is plugged into not just the tech guys in Silicon Valley, but all over. And he is obviously very sensitive to climate change. And he agreed several years ago, I think 3 years ago, to move from the business school, which is probably more prestigious, and he's been the head now for 3 years of the ag school. And so he is bringing in a technology savvy into the administration of the School of Agriculture. And some of the things that they're looking at is, how do you look at and again, this isn't a question of semiconductors or anything, but how do you look at what you feed cattle or hogs so that they don't give off, so that their fugitive emissions are somewhat held in check? And there are a bunch of proteins and enzymes that they're looking at along those lines to find something that's cost effective, because I suspect we will get to a place where we'll find a way to do that in a cost efficient way, because it is, globally, it's a significant source of emissions. Although if you bring that up around your agricultural community, they get very animated because they feel that the food is more valuable than those emissions, and in many cases they're probably right. Oh, you bet. Thank you.
On your left.
Yes,
here.
sorry.
Hi, Governor. Thank you for being here. Doug Sabo of Visa, fellow Wesleyan alum. Go West.
Go Wesleyan.
I had an opportunity yesterday on behalf of the company to announce our commitment to 100% renewable electricity. I mentioned that our Denver vicinity operations and data centers is about 25% of our global footprint, and we're really relying on some of the great programs that Excel is bringing online to give us access to clean energy. We think it's extremely attractive, but we also think it's going to be so attractive it's going to probably be oversubscribed on day one. Can you talk a little bit around the next wave of some of the clean energy options that Colorado companies and companies with presence here will have options to?
Well, I think just what you said, I think we're on the edge of a next wave, and finding more resources so that these opportunities are not oversubscribed the moment they come out. And part of the way, you're not going to like hearing this, but part of the way is to make them a little less per person, or in terms of each kilowatt, but being able to leverage it other ways to get more benefit. And one way to look at this, and there's a congressman named Tim Ryan in Ohio, and I saw him speak 2 nights ago, and he's pretty good. And he was talking about actually we were having a whole conference on opportunity zones and entrepreneurship. And just like many of you have something that's genetic to you, I'm kind of an entrepreneur. I'm not sure how I got into this job, because it's not really the entrepreneurial best place to be. But Congressman Ryan said that I guess his uncle had told him that God really loves ordinary people, because look how many he made. And then he paused and he said, but what we're seeing today is extraordinary things being done by ordinary people. And I think that covers not just this room, but so many of the folks out there that are pushing these innovations and trying to find the right incentives and trying to figure out how do we motivate not just small groups, but large groups of ordinary people to go out and do these extraordinary things. And that as more and more people do begin to understand the catastrophic potential that climate change brings with it, right? When you start looking at the salinity of the seas and what happens when you melt an ice sheet, and what does that mean to the climate of Europe, these things are so staggering that people can't help it but they go beyond the ordinary and really begin to take on the extraordinary. And you guys all know this because you're here and part of that, but part of what allows extraordinary acts from people that are, most of us would feel pretty ordinary. I'm a bar owner. I'm not sure what the hell I'm doing up here. But it is our obligation to make sure that we motivate and keep that enthusiasm and momentum, so that as this wave really begins to break, we don't leave it behind. I think I've got time for one more or two more questions. Right here, and then way back there after that.
Good afternoon. My name is Arif Hussain, and I work with Transport Canada in Ottawa. I have a question for you with respect to infrastructure deficit. As you know, all major states in the U.S. are facing some serious and some chronic infrastructure challenges. Should I start again?
No, I heard.
And they would naturally look at the federal government to provide them with some form of grants or any financial tools. Last month, the US federal government announced a $1.7 trillion infrastructure plan, and I'll be a bit conservative to say that...
I thought you were going to say last month the US government announced a $1.7 trillion increase to the national debt. But
That too.
I'm sorry,
I am referring to the infrastructure plan
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's true, I'm sorry.
that made vague to no connections to climate change. And some of the news articles have mentioned that that plan does not include climate change. So, Governor, my question to you is, how do you take a balanced approach between climate change, but also some of the infrastructure challenges that you face in the state?
So they're so tightly connected, and they should be completely nonpartisan. And I'd hold out, and Martha Rudolph, thank you. Martha Rudolph's here. We had a discussion. She helps run the Department of Public Health and the Environment, and we were looking at some of the levers we have around clean air. And neither of us knew who was Republicans, who was Democrats, you know, in that meeting or in her office. And that's really the way it should be. And I think that, I'll tell you a funny story. I mean, Colorado's doing great economy. A big part of that's Denver is rapidly become one of the real magnets for millennials and young people. It's not just the music. It's not just the 1,000 miles of bike trails. Those help. But we also, when I was mayor in 2003, we passed something in 2004. I got elected in 2003, and I ran for the first time as a mayor saying, Denver, from now on, is going to make no decision unless it also benefits the suburbs. And in almost every region in this country, you have the city surrounded by the suburbs, and they're always feuding with each other. For one thing, and half the time it's over nothing. It's just, you know, it's a way to demonstrate your political capability to, you know, define yourself by your enemies. Nobody in the restaurant business or the bar business would ever, you know, we know there's no margin in having enemies. Anyway, we decided we're going to go forward with fast tracks, which was 123 miles of new track, right? Either light rail or commuter rail track. We just finished, it's almost all built out now. And it was 0.4% sales tax increase for the whole region. And we spent the time and went out and talked to all of the mayors. So we had, at that time, there were 34 mayors in the metropolitan region. About 2/3 were either Republicans or conservative-leaning independents. And at the end, we had all 34 mayors unanimously supported this tax increase, right? Nonpartisan, right? Republicans, Democrats, everyone spoke up and went back to their communities and pitched it as a way to clean up our air and to accommodate future growth. And when you look at it, when I go out and I ask a young person, well, what made you choose to come to Colorado? Why are you in Denver? Boy, they talk about our transit system. You know, more often than not, if it's not the first thing, it's the second thing when they talk about it. And it's way ahead of talking about legal pot, just for those of you guys who are cynics out there, right? And I think that's part of our mission is, that we have to look at infrastructure investments, and especially around transit. And I'm not sure it's always light rail. Bus rapid transit is in many ways, when we get electric bus rapid transit, boy, it's going to be a game changer in many ways. Platform driven, it'll be cost effective, far beyond what we have now in terms of light rail. And those investments are going to help your economy for decades, right? For generations. And the more we can get that message out and people can hear it and believe it, then those investments in infrastructure are going to happen, because the federal government can't right now raise the money to do the investments that we all agree they should do. They are, I mean, the national debt is too high. We're, you know, for all kinds of reasons, we've let it just grow at an enormous rate, and we're going to have to figure out how to do more of this financing on a local basis. And at least in Colorado, and I think most places around the country are similar, local communities will vote in favor of new revenues to pay for those kinds of improvements much more easily than the nation would vote for, you know, increasing a gas tax. So ultimately, I believe we're going to have more. Now, the federal government still has to play a role. I mean, you can't do it without there's a lot of different benefits that the federal government can bring to bear in improving our infrastructure. But it's going to be more states, and especially, you know, not metropolitan areas, in the large areas, in large communities will be metropolitan areas, but the smaller towns working with their their surrounding environments as well. We got to raise our ability to do collaboration at a level that we've never imagined before. We're just never going to be able to solve, it's not just climate change, all of these challenges. Again, you're all deputized. Thank you all very much.